session is looking at actually using tech as a multiplier for scale, and in terms of journey from day 1 to day 1,000, and to actually share his perspective, engage in a discussion on that topic is Pramod Jajoo. Pramod is a venture partner with Kalaari. He has a bachelor's and master's degree in computer science, more than 25 years of industry experience, working with tech startups, and deep experience in product and technology. He's built market-leading software products from conceptualization to actually widespread industry adoption in SaaS and mobile and consumer internet applications. At Kalaari, Pramod's role is to work with portfolio companies, given his technical expertise, and to mentor them in building habit-forming products and that customers would love. Pramod, he works with the deal team in terms of technology, due diligence as part of the investment process, looks at technical trends that will be the drivers of future growth. Prior to Kalaari, Pramod spent almost 5.5 years with BigBasket as CTO, where he was responsible for all the aspects of software, product engineering, product management, and from ground up played a crucial role in building one of India's most innovative and loved consumer internet companies. Pramod started his career in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area, where he spent 12 years in software engineering and management roles at Sun Microsystems, at Healthion, WebMD, in fact, Rajan just talked about it, and at, is it Xora?
Yeah, Zora.
Yeah, Zora. And later, as VP of Engineering and MD of India Operations, he led global engineering for Zora, a leader in location-based SaaS domain. So with that, Pramod, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to be here. Just want to get some sense of the audience, who's in the audience. So how many of you, because my talk is about, it's not technical in depth, but I cover the journey for building a good tech product, tech team, some of the learnings from there. So how many of you are either hands-on coder or have been hands-on coder or manage hands-on coder? Just raise your hands, okay? A big chunk of you. What about product? Either in a head of product, CPO in that way? Okay, good. And the first two. So anybody in the non-techie things? Okay, few of you, okay. All right, so the title is Learning from the Trenches of my journey on scaling BigBasket. So just quick background about this. So BigBasket actually is about 6-year-old company now, founded in October 2011. First customer delivery happened December 2011. Series A funding soon after that. And I decided to join as a CTO in January and came on in April. The site existed when I joined. We had like one engineer, right, when I was interviewing. So that was a scale that we were on fairly early on. Okay. Now, first things first, in terms of, so this is the advice to people who are in that first two roles, mostly in the first role, building tech. So if you're coming new, like I came new to BigBasket, so some of you who either are new to the role that you're playing, but you've been, let's say, handed over a mandate of building technology, or you are, your co-founders just starting on, I think it's important to have the alignment on the company vision and core values, and I talk more about that. It's also important to have financial constraints understanding in terms of what you have to play with, what leeway you have in building the team. Also, it's important to understand your role, whatever the role that you have, and I talk more about the role responsibility, but it's very important to understand what you are going to be dealing with. And then if you are new to the role, like as I said, when I came on board, the site already existed. So we need to just dive in and figure out what exists. And in the startup sense, there isn't any role in this sense to say the CTO or head of technology has to be super hands-on. So you have to be very technical. And if you are not, then I think you should replace yourself and get somebody else who can play that role in terms of product architecture, design, getting to the level of the coding and all that stuff. You don't have to be a coder per se, but you need to be intimately understand the deep knowledge of technology. So that's very important. So that's why I call it be super hands-on in that thing. So the first things first, that said, I think the culture, in my opinion, eats everything else for lunch, right? And it's important to write down what your culture is. If not for the company, at least for the team that you are responsible for, let's say the product technology team. And communicate that to the entire team and continue to do that as you go forward. And get it done as early as possible. So in fact, the first presentation I did to the team, and so by the time I joined, we had like 4 people. And even before I joined, I made this presentation. My first presentation for BigBasket team was about the culture and the values that we must have as a team, okay? Now, and you need to do this as the new hires come on board and communicate that information. And the most important thing is to imbibe the startup spirit, right? There are all these values that really make the startup spirit happen. And what happens is not everybody is from a startup. Some of the things you're going to hire freshers potentially, you're going to have people from non-startup backgrounds. And so be very careful in inculcating those, imbibing the startup values. And I can do a multi-hour talk just on, the culture and values, but that's very important. The other thing I see less often, and that's why I want to emphasize that, is you got to set the bar really high and put the stake in the ground to say we're going to be the world class in what we're doing, right? And don't worry about salary or what other constraints are, right? So if you stake the thing to say I want to be world class, we're going to be world class, you think from that perspective and you aspire to be that, not that people are going to be Larry Page or let's say Mark Zuckerberg's, because all of us have different capabilities, but it's important to set that ambition and keep driving that ambition. So people aspire to be that. And one of the things that, I've been a techie, for a very long time, and you've been techies here. The big value that a techie expects, or the big driver for a techie to do more, is when they see other techie that they can learn from, right? And that, if you were to salary aside, that's the biggest thing to attract a get techie, to have a good team culture that people can learn on. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And obviously be a mentor and coach and a role model for your team, especially on the technical aspects and the aspects of building team. Now, I will talk a little bit about the tech focus, and this is a very high level thing, but from a business need, even though I'm talking to a tech audience or people who are leading technology teams, it is not about technology, right? And some problems from a technology perspective, you would find it really boring, very simple to solve, but may have a huge impact on the business. And I have done a lot of those things. Some of those things had immense value on our backend on BigBasket. Technically, the problem is very trivial to solve. Most software developers don't get excited about those, okay? But you must, communicate those values to say this. People require coaching on this to say, look, I don't know how many of you know, but let's say WhatsApp is built in Erlang. Does anybody care? Is Erlang, C++, Python, Java? No. It just works, we use it. So it doesn't really matter. So for a techie to get this message across, I think requires a lot of practice. And so the leader, if they preach to say, look, I don't want to trivialize the technology per se, And if you're a great techie yourself and you give this message, it goes a long way. But it's a business type giving this message doesn't go far. You understand what I'm saying? But if it comes from a fellow techie, then it has a lot of weight. But we have to focus on the business first. Most of you, I mean, is there anybody who's not on the cloud here? Okay, everybody's on the cloud. But what I would say, I just put a few things on the cloud here is, if needed, use a third-party consultant. Things are difficult. Not all of us are cloud experts. DevOps may not be your core competency, and it's not for most teams. So don't hesitate to validate your architecture with outside experts. As much as possible, use the managed services provided by the cloud providers, right? And don't shy away from that. So in fact, many times I would talk to a company and says, why are you not using a cloud service, let's say for database management like an RDS from Amazon? And they say, oh no, but we need the flexibility to move the provider from, let's say, Amazon to Google. And I said, really? I mean, come on. I mean, don't optimize for that yet. When you have that problem, you'll figure it out. But the thing to do, remember, is that all cloud providers are investing heavily in innovation and building out the services. And why won't you put that innovation to use for yourself? Okay? Otherwise, you will end up building a lot of those services that somebody else has already built. So as much as possible, I'm saying use the managed services and then deploy them, even though it could come at some cost. And I would say, have all of your environment on the cloud, whether it's dev, staging, pre-production, whatever else. Use other SaaS products, for your dev needs. But one of the other thing is that with the cloud platform, the cost could balloon without you realizing it. So just pay attention to cost and keep an eye on it. And we can talk about more of the cost optimization. But don't take it for granted that the cost would be under control, because suddenly you'll realize that some dev guy has spun up 4 machines and it's been running for 1 month and nothing has been done on that set of machines, right? So it just starts to add up. Security is a huge thing, and many companies don't spend enough time on it, but it's important to understand this. It's important to have key people in your team go through all the security offerings on the cloud provider, understand recommended practice. So like AWS has a trusted advisor report would come out. There are the blueprints of implementation on security. Get an external agency to audit it. It's a very specialized skill. And I would guarantee you that even if you're a security expert today, you won't be a security expert a year from now unless you keep up with all those stuff, right? So there's no shame in saying that, hey, I'm going to just have a service provider which is going to, keep giving this service periodically. Important to track all the internal user activity on production environment, record, whatever else, there are many tools which allow you to do that. And pay attention to security aspects of, many services. So an example of this is, I don't know how many of you are on AWS? Okay, a big chunk. So AWS S3 had this weird policy that we got beaten at BigBasket. So it said the bucket, it says, user authentication. Users, you could have a public bucket, no access is required, or you could say user access is required to have this bucket accessible. So I said, okay, fine, and that makes sense. But what we didn't realize that user access meant anybody with an AWS account could access it. And the read-write permission of the user access, not only on BigBasket domain, but it was pretty much open to public to write. And you can imagine somebody could deface your website with those kind of a security policy, right? Because they could, rewrite your images or CSS files or anything else that you may be putting on that. So it's important to understand the security side of the tools that you're using. And on the application security side, make sure that you have access control, roles, permissions, encrypt all the sensitive data, anonymize data when you take it from production to local. Because your threat on security is going to be internal. It's not as much going to be external. It's going to be some users who you should not have access to data that has, and eventually the leaks are going to come from that. And if it has not happened, it would happen, right? That's been our experience. So you want to make sure that the security is as well managed as possible, because if there is any hole, people would exploit it eventually. And not going to spend too much time on this, but make sure the VAPT testing, you do this periodically. You got to safeguard your APIs with rate control, because some of these hacks are going to happen on that. If you don't already have a WAF or a DDoS, you got to put that ASAP. I can tell you from experience. There were like 3 days in a row that I was working non-stop because we had a DDoS attack on BigBasket. This was many years ago, and we were very close to putting the DDoS, but it was in the pilot phase and it had not been turned on. And just the timing was such that just before that we got it took us good 48 to 72 hours on a very massive DDoS attack that happened, right? So that's a reality today, that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when your product, app, website would get an attack from a DDoS perspective. And so I would say that's a must. Preferably get a third-party service for that, configure your Nginx, Apache, whatever else that you use, even to put the basic configuration there. HTTPS is a must. I don't know how many, are there any people who are running without HTTPS today? Just raise your hand. Everybody's on HTTPS 100%? 100%? Are you sure? Okay, fantastic. Because I think this Chrome is going to shut down, or I just saw a blog post from Chrome team that in about 4 months, it will start to show HTTP sites as non-secure, right? And then have a bug bounty program. If you don't have it officially, just put it there. Something like a bugcrowd.com or something equivalent, or just an ethical hacker. Okay. On architecture, on the high level thing, I think the importance is, in my mind, is robustness, performance, and scalability in that order. And so what does robustness mean, right? First and foremost, we have to make things functional. I've seen way too many developers, way too many product guys, get, very excited about cute sitting. This is how it's going to perform better, or I'm going to have scalability. That's a moot point if it doesn't work. So the first and foremost is to make things work first, right? And in making it work, there is this principle called KISS. There's a pun there to say keep it simple, stupid, or you could say keep it simple, stupid. So stupid is maybe refer to the person who you're talking to. And so we got to absolutely reduce the number of moving parts. And the thing to remember here is that the biggest tension that you probably would see in your team, as well as at any place, is techies get very enamored over technology, right? So remember that first point to say it's not about technology. Use what is suitable at hand as opposed to bleeding edge and cool technology, right? And so if DBMS is the right thing for you, go for it, as opposed to saying, okay, I just want to use whatever the shiny NoSQL database there. So even if you are using polyglot persistence, you have to make sure that you're not adding too many different, tech stack components, right? So if, let's say, Mongo is your, NoSQL of choice, then, put more things there, as opposed to saying, okay, I want, A, B, C, D, or I want Golang, and I want Ruby, and I want Python, and I want Java. That doesn't make any sense, right? And you don't want too many languages, you don't want too many of same kind, right? Even if you're using polyglot persistence, just keep the tech stack as narrow as possible for as long as possible, right? And at the expense of, some guys would say, I know everything now, what's new for me to learn? And we'll talk about that, but I think this is not the way to experiment, right? Because you're going to get into more issues than not if you just keep adding more things to your tech stack. I cannot overemphasize on the robustness part of it, the design aspect of it, and And I think many a times people don't spend enough time whiteboarding things. They want to get into writing code right away to say, okay, I have an idea, I'm just going to write code, or the developer gets really excited, starts building stuff. And I think it's important to just spend as much time brainstorming as possible. And, and this I came across many years ago, a principle of good design, right? So a simple definition of a good design is where simple changes are simple and complicated changes are possible, right? So you know when you have a bad design, if simple changes become hard. So, and we've seen, I've seen many examples of that to say, okay, we are doing some change, and conceptually it looks like a very small thing to do, a simple thing to do. And the developer would say, oh, no, it's going to take me 2 weeks to do, when it should have taken half a day because, there are dependency here, I need to modify this, maybe I need to modify the schema, a lot of things need to happen to make this change. So it's a time to, look at the design. You may have an issue with that. I'm not going to talk too much about whether it's microservices, monolith, what should be the right component architecture, what is the way to break services. But essentially, just pay good attention to that. Roles, abstraction, isolation of components. Make sure, no matter what you use, your components are logically, physically separated. Logically separated for sure, not necessarily physically. And easily replicable and as stateless as you can make them to be so that you can scale them at will, right? And the hardest thing to scale obviously is your data store, but the rest of the things should be, you should be able to scale, right? And again, we could spend hours just talking about the component architecture, but I won't go into details on that. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the MVP. A lot of people talk about minimal viable product, but many times when I talk to people, I think people are using that as an excuse to not think about details and eventual goals. So MVP is not an excuse not to think about what you're trying to build, right? It is not, just hack something quickly and then figure out how it will work later. Because remember that invariably it will take you much longer to get things done. And once you build things stay on for much longer than you expect them to before you rewrite them, right? So MVP is not a shortcut for just hacking things quick and dirty, because more often than not it'll come back and bite you. So one way to think about MVP is look at eventual product features that you want to build, and then you say, okay, what is my milestones, right? Can I, this looks like a good place to just do a milestone, and then maybe you just release that first. But you have an idea as to what you would want to build later. And there are going to be cases where you absolutely have no idea, right, as to what the product would look like or a feature would look like. In that case, you could do a core and then iterate faster. But this should not be an excuse for not thinking through it, which is a caution that I've seen many people not follow, right? I'm not going too much into this, but on the robustness thing, logging is super essential, and I've seen people don't log enough, especially if they have microservices and let's say 10 services are stitched together. Often enough there is not even a request tracking to say what is the footprint of a request. There are no centralized logging. So, and now there are fantastic tools like ELK. When I started about 5-6 years ago, obviously Elastic didn't really exist as much, right? Monitor everything. Especially exceptions in your system, either through email, other mechanisms, right? But, last thing you want to have is have 1,000 emails come to you and people are just ignoring them, right? And so if you have a huge signal to noise, noise to signal ratio, then that's not a good thing, because when a real alert happens, then people are ignoring it, right? If just spurious alerts are coming in, clogging your email or whatever, okay? And so as early as possible, make sure that you have a good monitoring thing through Nagios, CloudWatch, anything else, right? Write your own monitoring scripts. As much as possible, have self-healing restarts on the servers. For apps, crash reporting is super important. Because when things fail, the only thing you have is the logs. You don't have anything else, right? You can't ask the user to do it again. And so you should be able to debug everything that happens just by looking at the footprint of the logs later. And sooner than later, so this is something that I did not do it as early as I wish I had, but if possible, put the APM into your application performance monitoring as early as possible in your ecosystem. I remember, the first 6 months or so, we didn't have anything, and what our tool was looking at Google Analytics and the number of real-time users on the site to say how well the site is performing. And suddenly you'll say, hey, what happened? I had X number of users, and suddenly it's like close to zero. As the website is down or something else is happening, right? And it's important to get this early as much as possible, and then just have a dashboard for all of your key metrics. I mean, you won't hit any scale unless you get these things done correctly, right? Otherwise, you're going to spend way too much time debugging your components. So I would say, CPU, memory, disk, network, other things, because all those components are important. Caching, I'm sure all of you have it, but great to get started with Redis, Memcache, something similar. Eventually, you could use a paid tool like Aerospike if performance becomes an issue for you, the throughput becomes an issue, and you really need literally huge volumes of cache requests. If you don't already have a CDN, get this thing done as early as possible. Because it has huge impact on performance. The other thing is, I've seen that the database, most developers aren't good at database things, especially if you're using MySQL. People don't understand why, the thing is deadlocking, or the IO is very high, or why the query performance beyond creating an index. So the most common thing is people look at a query plan to say, okay, it's doing a full table scan. Okay, that's basic stuff. But beyond that, why is the performance like that? So I think it's important to track the data store performance regularly. And I'll give you an example again from my BigBasket early days. As I said, we used to, suddenly the Google would show that the site used to blip from time to time. It's like, what, and so we did not have some of these things. So I'll just tell you from experience. And so we just thought, okay, the problem was something else. We replaced that server component. We are on a Python web server. We just replaced the container to something else. Still, it will blip from time to time. Okay. Then, much later, a week or two, we realized that we had this old database script which was taking a backup of the entire database and dumping it there. So it was okay for a time being initially, but as the database became larger, because a backup requires a lock on the whole metadata, right? So as the database gets backed up, it shuts down the writes to the database till it acquires the lock and copies it. So obviously, everything else gets shut down while you are doing the backup. And the only way we would have known that if you had looked at this, if you had a dashboard early on to say, hey, the database is showing that it's locking or it's asking for a lock, right? And other thing I would want you to look at carefully is, I'm sure you use async a lot with the SKUs or whatever else. The thing to look at async is, if your application requires once and only once semantics, this is a very hard thing to do. And, and just review your architecture to make sure that you are covered on this. And so the last thing you want to do is, send a customer 2 emails for an order placement, or an email on an order placement, and the transaction is rolled back, the email just still went out, right? Because all these things have happened with us at BigBasket. I'm just telling you from experience, because not everybody pays attention to that. So eventually you have to put in places where, because our customer got email and the transaction was rolled back and then the order never came. But the email was there to say order is placed, right? So all these boundaries of transactions, the side effects of the transaction, the async nature, once and only once, these are very hard thing to do, but it requires architecture focus to review it, make sure you're doing it properly. this, I get these questions asked a lot, so I thought I'll put a slide on this to say, should you use free tools or open source or free, right? I mean, or paid tools. So my suggestion to this is, absolutely use all the open source things you can, as much as you can. But, make sure that you have budget and you're creating budget to pay for the paid tools as and when they're required. And don't shy away from, opening your purse and spending money on it. Otherwise, you're going to shortchange yourself with the free tools or not doing anything on that. So as I said, Neuralink is a fantastic tool. It's not cheap, but it adds a lot of value. Even like Akamai or Cloudflare or whatever else, Aerospike is a fantastic caching tool, but it's not free. And then you could use paid services like the Elastic Cache, RDS, and clearly mails and all everybody pays for. But besides that, just think about the budget for it, and just don't shy away from using software that you have to pay for, right? Don't agonize over it to say, oh, no, my cost would go up, because you would spend more time later chasing those problems otherwise. So technical debt, this is not, it's not one size fit all answer. The thing about technical debt is, whatever you do today, let's say you were to build a new component, tomorrow you already have a debt of 1 day, because whatever you use today, there's something new that has come in overnight. I'm sure something would have, either a new version of the library, something else, a new way of doing things. Clearly the debt starts to build as the time progresses, right? And it's important to have a plan to keep paying off that. You'll never be debt free. So if you think you are on the leading edge today, guaranteed that you will not be on the leading edge a year from now. Okay? No matter what you use, right? And so look out for new ways of doing things, and my suggestion is, maybe in about 2 years' time, if you're a 2-year-old company, that's the time to actually dedicate a team, a small team for platforms, maybe 2-3 engineers, right? For your code platforms, which look at the overall architecture, very senior guys who just, their job is not to do day-to-day stuff. But, if you're an AI company, they just look at new algorithms, new frameworks that are coming up. If you are, building for scale, they will look at new storage capability, maybe a new tool, something that gives you advantage, right? And but this is a topic that you have to keep in mind on the debt side, right? So on the analytics, I mean, it's easier said than done, but, and everybody, I'm sure all of you would say that, hey, we do this already, but more people, this is not as easy as you think. My suggestion is track and measure everything. And data correctness is a big thing, and many people don't have one data store or one source of truth, right? And so suddenly you'll say, okay, what does our growth look like, or how many number of orders we took, or whatever else. Somebody said 100, somebody says 94, somebody says 104. Multiple people are giving multiple answers because people are looking at different things, right? And that is not good. So just have one source of truth, whatever it is, right? And focus and fix inconsistencies in that one source of truth. And I've seen this happen a lot. Google Analytics shows one thing, something else shows something else, something else shows something else. Facebook shows X number of visitors, your internal system shows something else. So just don't look at multiple data sources. One is what you want, and that should be source of truth. And just, even if you're using a free tool like Google, add events, custom events, variables, whatever else. If you're using app events on Firebase, which I'm sure a lot of you are doing, if you're using clickstream data, my suggestion is sooner than later. It's better to build your own. I don't know what that inflection point is going to be for you. It's better to get that in-house. Sooner than later, Snowplow is a fantastic tool. Which is what BigBasket, eventually everything goes through Snowplow, and all the data is, we have our own custom events, data aggregation, so all that thing goes there. And even when you're doing micro interactions on your app, on the website, make sure that you track the context, right? So if the same action is possible in 20 places, it's important to say where did the user do this action. Otherwise, you will mostly go blind on that. The other thing, people get too fancy in terms of the newest, new algorithms and all. An old style MIS goes a long way, okay? Just, whatever relational database, reports. So you don't need to be too fancy in the beginning. Just have one source of truth. Everybody who needs to have that data has access to that data. Build a data warehouse, as early as possible. Especially if you run microservices, and I've seen data is sitting in, I don't know, 50 places. There is no unified view of data. Okay, so each service writes to your own data store, and people don't know exactly what's going on. So you have to put all that thing together as early as possible through some warehousing, right? And pictures are worth 1,000 words, so then you got to have a visualization on that data, So spend time on that. The other thing to remember is, it's easy to generate a huge amounts of data. It's super easy. Super hard to make the data actionable. Okay, so whatever the data, it needs to give you insights. The insights have to be actionable. It needs to answer to say, okay, what should I do next? As opposed to, okay, the graph is going this way. What does it mean? We don't know, right? And obviously today, I recommend most companies to start on the DS as early as possible. Even if you're not an AI company, you got to build a data science team fairly early on. Maybe if you have a 20-30% engineering team, 1 or 2 data scientists are great to have. So, maybe that ratio is good, 1:10, engineers versus data people, right? And so because the engineers will never, so data science layer underneath, as you know, has grounding on statistics, probability and linear algebra, right? And then all the data related things, and a lot of the software engineers, classic software engineers, aren't trained in that. So you could get one of your software engineers, train them on the data science thing, but have that, because we can go on and on the thing about data science, but clearly personalization, smart targeting, forecasting, none of these things are possible unless you have some focus on data science, right? And scikit-learn is not data science, right? You could just say I use Python, and I just have implemented this algorithm. It seems to work, but that's okay. What does it mean, right? And do you know is there a better way to do it? What is your accuracy level? What is the if they're using, what is the recall precision? How do you tune it? So all those, the biases in the data. So many things go into making a great data scientist. So just like there are great computer scientists, don't make great data scientists, and vice versa. So, there's a specialized skill, so you must hire for that. So I will talk a little bit about product and design. It's a big topic. Again, I can spend, a lot of time on each one of those things, but just to quickly give you things to say, Rajan talked a lot about keeping user in the center, but that's very important to have user-centric design. Understand the user context, user environment, in building user interfaces. And even though it may seem obvious, I didn't have time today, but I could have shown you a lot of examples of many big, successful companies today of India who have a lot of these things not done right? I talked about imbibing data orientation, so the product guys really have to think about that. And again, measure everything. The other thing to remember from a user interface perspective is people sitting in this audience and the users are not the same. The users don't have engineering degree or MBA degree, right? Far from it. Even the metro users are going to be nothing like you in terms of who are you going to be end users. So we need to really understand simplicity. And let's see. And then, and once you have data orientation, then just look at what does your cohort analysis tell you. NPS, do you measure that? If you don't, that's a great first thing to measure, right? But don't measure it only when the user is very happy. I think I was talking to somebody and says, oh, my NPS is very high. And I say, okay, when do you give the NPS survey? And when they say customer has a very positive experience, okay, that's obviously the case, then it's going to be high, right? So NPS has to be a randomized survey. So you need to cut across your user population and ask for NPS. And that's why you're going to get a realistic answer. And clearly there has to be some experimentation thing that you have to do, either homegrown, otherwise you got to do multiple iterations to figure out what works with your product with ABs, right? Performance makes a huge difference. So this is a very old quote from, it was from a talk from Marissa Mayer, 2006. So they were doing some experiment and suddenly they realized that that experiment was the users were requesting Google that, why don't you show us more search results in a page? They're only showing 10 results, but we would like to see more, maybe 30. So they took that on and they went from 10 results to 30. And they realized that when they did that, it took half a second extra, right? So in fact, at that time, the Google used to take 400 milliseconds to a response. It went from 400 to 900 milliseconds. But the search traffic dropped by 20% because users didn't want to wait for half a second extra, right? So even today, Google doesn't do more than 10 results. It's still 10 or 15, whatever that thing is, right? So this is a big topic, but I just list a few things here. Taking actions first, then sending it to the server. Like if you look at LinkedIn, Twitter, they do that quite a bit. When you press a button to say I like, first the counter changes, and then in the async, the background, the data gets sent to the server. So you could look at some of those things in your things. So and in fact, I'll give you an example of WhatsApp. Recently, about maybe 6-8 months ago, WhatsApp did this one optimization in the way videos and pictures get shared. That increased the utilization of those features by almost engagement by about 40 to 50%. The graph just moved up, the usage. Does anybody know what they did? Any thoughts? Sorry? No. I'm just saying the sharing increased. Okay, so the topic is your performance. So what do you think? Okay, so because we don't have enough time, so I'll just tell you. So one of the things that the WhatsApp realized was that unlike other platforms, most content on WhatsApp which is shared is not unique. So if you look at the number of shares divided by the number of unique content, the same content gets shared. So you get a video, you send it to 10 of your friends. Those 10 friends are sending it to 10 of their friends. So same video is getting shared across, right? So they said that even though it's encrypted, they have a unique hash of the media on their CDN. And so if it's already shared, even though it's a 30 MB file, you share it, but if somebody else has already shared it, it will be uploaded instantaneously from your phone. So even a big video just uploads instantaneously when you're forwarding. Before it used to spin for a lot of time, it will load from your own local storage to the server. They just completely optimize that. Pictures, video, and at their scale, that increased the graph is on a different level now, right? So performance has a huge role to play in terms of, so that is tweaking the flow for a design performance. You also have to look at non-happy flows, right? Non-happy flows are, making sure that users don't have dead ends and empty things. And sometimes you have to also tweak the flow for a better user experience. An example of that is at BigBasket. We used to see that a lot of payment failures were there when you go to payment gateway. So we're the first company which kind of reverts this flow to say we'll place the order first and then take you to the payment gateway. So even if the payment fails, the order is still there. And it becomes a cash on delivery order, but nonetheless, the order exists. That used to be a friction for most of our users. When they come back, the payment failed and they will come back and not having an order was a problem, right? And so if you're doing multiple steps, you got to have the feedback loop there, look at your onboarding. So again, a big topic here, and I don't have enough time to cover it. Rajan talked about the Indians being super cost conscious. I think the thing about price is this: whoever is competing on price, you have to win the price perception, not just on price. So even if you have the right price for your user, but your user think your product is expensive, that's you lost the battle there, right? So it's important to talk about, do communication around price perception, not just on the price, right? And you got to win the user's trust. And we, Indians tend to get offended, or when somebody violates our trust, we get really worked up. And so it's important to get the trust of the user here, right? So I will give an example. Some few months ago I had parked at ITPL. I don't know how many people parked in this parking lot, the visitor parking lot. So they said, sir, do you want to park for the whole day, 100 rupees, per hour 30? I was like, didn't pay attention. I said, yeah, per hour is fine. So I come back and he said 4 hours, 120 rupees. I said, okay, your daily is 100, so why are you charging me 120? He said, no, once it's daily, I can charge you whatever. For 10 hours, I'll charge you 300 rupees. So I felt cheated, right? They should have capped it at the daily rate, right? And so that's an experience that the users would have with you. So the pricing have to be fair. So I think that's a little bit, even though it made sense for ITPL parking, it doesn't really make sense for the user. So again, I won't talk too much about this, but this is a super important thing to say, especially the Indian software products aren't really paying as much attention to behavioral science and psychology, right? And I can do maybe a few hours just on this topic. But there is, and if you're interested, we can talk more. But I will not have time to even talk through this, some of the nudge or paradox of choice or some of the cognitive biases and how it plays in building the product, right? So just give you one example of cognitive bias, right? So we would have studied, like a loss aversion is a cognitive bias, as opposed to joy of a gain, we don't like to lose something. So people have, you would have seen Amazon Prime giving you a free membership. That's an example of a bias working against the user, but for the favor of the company in some ways, that once that free trial gets over, users don't want to lose that free trial, right? So that's a loss aversion stuff, and so on and so forth. And the thing about, I'll talk about the internal processes, especially whoever is doing prioritization. Your best friend is to say no. I can tell you how many people have hard time just saying no to product features or having that hard conversations and priorities, because a startup is always going to be resource strapped, right? You have more things to do than your resources will allow you to do. The last thing you want to do is just do more things but not doing anything well. And so as a leader, you have to make sure that you are thinking hard to say what I'm going to say yes on, right? And if I'm saying no, what does it mean from the business perspective? And then, write specs. And during development, if you have a product and engineering separate, make sure that you're seeing that work or showcasing it multiple times during the development cycle in the agile way, right? One thing that has worked well, and it's a good practice to have, this comes from Amazon. So when they're building product specs, they have this notion to say, write post-dated press releases. And, a press release format is generally a format which has mostly key results to say, XYZ got launched, something went up by 20%, customer engagement is up by 20%, my growth is there. It's all numbers and maybe a quote of a successful customer or a stakeholder or something that's making an impact on that, right? And by making product features written in this way, or at least a summary of the product features, it just makes you think in a very different way. First, it makes you put a date. So let's say you're conceptualizing something, maybe the date is May 1st, and say, okay, May 1st, you have this press release to say this feature is launched and your user engagement went up by 200%. The average time spent on the user went up the MAU went up, the DAU went up, whatever your metrics the feature is supposed to do, right? And then what happens is, then if you're not able to achieve that press release, then you would work towards to say, okay, what's going on? What does my press release look like, right? So there's a way to quantify, what the impact is. Otherwise, we can all build features without measuring any impact. So it just forces you to look at the impact that the feature is doing, as opposed to just building it because you think it's a good thing to do, right? And internally, it's important to have, deployment notes, just get into a habit of circulating to say this is what we built, and this is the, as the team grows larger, this becomes important. So I just want to talk a little bit about hiring and the team a little bit. So as I said, first and foremost is understand your budget constraints, right? Now, your budget may be different than somebody else's. Google may pay at whatever market rate, somebody else may pay something. You need to understand what you're paying at, okay, and what your budget is. And then you need to say, okay, that's my constraint, right? Validate that to say, are you able to hire talent in that budget first, right? And I would say, as much as possible, even for QA hires, all tech hires, and I'm highly biased towards getting computer science guys, right? Because over a long term, that would be much better for you than having a team with some mechanical engineer who's doing something, or, right? Not that, so there obviously could be exceptions, but don't dilute that without exceptions. Sometimes, people without those backgrounds are not even having a degree. One of my best engineers at BigBasket wasn't even a graduate. He dropped out of college, right? And did fantastically well, and when you talk to him, he was a superstar, right? So, but you have to take this from a pinch of salt, right? Early on, do not, even if you have an HR team, don't rely on HR much for doing your hiring. You got to network. This engineer that I was talking about, I just reached him cold because he had some Python, GitHub thing even 5 years ago, and I was like, okay, looks like you've done interesting work. Are you looking for an opportunity? He responded, and we got talking, right? So you have to do your own, cold reaching out to people, because it's easier when you have a brand. It's difficult when you don't have a brand. People don't know who you are, right? And so that's when you really have to go for. The other thing is to absolutely have clear job descriptions and an evaluation criteria to say what would you evaluate a person on, right? And if you have an interview team of, let's say, 2 or 3 people, whatever that things are, what is the role responsibility of each individual who's interviewing, right, on the interview panel? Otherwise, often enough, the same question gets asked by multiple people, everybody's asking the same thing. So you need to have a strategy to say, the interviewer, role A would focus on these skills, role B would focus on these skills, and so on and so forth. So then you have a much better, way of getting the candidate, right? The other important thing is, if you are choosy in hiring, which I'm sure most startups are, and we were, which means that you're going to reject more people, way more people than you're going to hire. So it's super important to treat those people with respect, even when you're saying them no. The person may be a complete misfit, but if you're rude to that and you just talk down to that person, right, it's not fair, right? And so we have had people refer us candidates on the candidates that we have rejected. As a result, we have not hired this person, but he would refer 2 other people because he just liked the process of interview as well as how the person was treated. So it's important to keep an attention and make sure that you don't dilute on this particular process. And I very biased towards looking for long-term people, right, and avoiding money-minding guys who just got a 30% raise, want another 30% raise, right? And that's why they're interviewing with you. Even if you were not to hire them, I think it's better to move on and talk to the candidate. And it's important to tell the long-term vision of the company, and just say, look, if you don't want to be here for whatever your long-term things are, and for me it's to be 4 or 5 years, and says, please don't join us, even if I give you an offer, right? You must have that conversation because it will increase the odds of that person staying with you longer. Not that, you can't put a handcuff or a chain on a person, but all those conversations help. When you talk about the long term, are you going to be staying? What do you think you want to do from 4 years from now? And do you think this is going to be a home for you, right? I think it's important. And so the other thing, the last thing is, a lot of people will drop off once you make offers. I don't know how many of you have had that experience. I'm sure all of you, right? And so these things are, if you had that conversation before, to say, even if I give you an offer, please don't accept unless you're serious in accepting, right? Then you would have a high chance of person not rejecting your offer later. They may not accept it to start with because you told them not to accept it, right? And in my mind, ability to learn is the most important thing. That's the biggest value that I really cherish myself. And I think that has been a predictor of a great hires for me. And the question for that is this. This is my favorite interview question, right? And which is basically to say, what did you learn in the last 6 months that your job did not require you to learn, right? Because again, person is not necessarily going to learn on the job. And so if they're a self-learner and they have the habit of learning, relearning for this, for the joy of learning, and they go deep into it, I think they will do far. They will be able to pick technology because technologies keep changing. You'll have technical debt to pay, right? So on the retention, I talked about culture. I think one thing that is underused, which is, and I have put this to a great use at BigBasket, is called pride in action. So what does it mean? So when you have sloppy work, when you call pride in action to say, guys, are we capable of doing more, better, right? So why are we not doing it better? Okay? So, and the same theme of question to say, this is not, does it reflect our work, And so the pride goes a long way, and especially as software engineers, pride goes a long way, right? And because they are more motivated on pride than on necessarily money. But that said, you empower team members to make decisions, define job titles, roles, responsibility, bands, salary, if the salary levels are not correct, if you are hiring new person at much higher salary than the existing guys, that's unfair on the existing team, right? So you might as well fix their salaries, even though you may not have budget for it, but then you're doing them a disservice by hiring other guys at much higher salary. Okay, so all these things are super important in retaining people. So stock options, retention bonus, I won't go into that, but communicate why, how, what. Training, as people are learning new things they like a lot, and is in your benefit to cross-train people or have multiple people with the same knowledge, right? Feedback in my mind is super important. So I would say solicit feedback on these 4 questions. If you don't do that, do this periodically, right? Which is to say, what are we doing well? What we are as a group or a team not doing well, ask your team members. What are we, what are we not doing that we should be doing? And if you're in my shoe, what would you do differently, right? And you would be surprised how many ideas you'll come if you just ask these 4 questions. And make it a habit of asking it, periodically. And honestly act on feedback. Just because somebody gives you an idea, tell them that I may not be able to implement all the suggestions. But this gets people thinking and gets people into, they think that they're empowered, they are part of the journey together as opposed to cog in the wheel, right? And foster learning, tech talks, sharing information, thought leadership talks, whatever else. So I won't go too much into it, but keep your teams very small, especially the engineering teams. The structure that worked very well for me, at least in the starting, is to have 1 principal engineer, 3 engineers, 1 QA, a 5-person team, okay? And as much as possible, eventually as you go forward, then you'll have an engineering managers. Get DevOps fairly early on, because that's otherwise all of your senior engineers would be doing DevOps, which is not a good thing. You may be doing DevOps, which is not a good thing, right? If you have a 24/7 site, You need to have an on-call responsibility. So, come up with a structure to have rotation on on-call, eventually a team for that, right? Functional versus horizontal teams, I think, keep it as horizontal as you can for as long as you can. So horizontal means everybody can do everything. So if you have a product feature, it doesn't have to be, okay, only Pramod can do this. Then you make a silo, and then those, let's say you have a team on only payments, or your team have only on, let's say if you're an e-commerce site, you could be a promotion engine team. They may not have enough work to do, right? So if you have horizontal, then you will get a better utilization. Eventually, maybe beyond 40, 50 engineers, you would get to a size where you may have to have functional teams, but that probably when you cross 50, right, in the team size. And as I said, in about 2-3 years' time, get a platform team to pay off your technical debt, focus on more on the performance scalability, right? All right, that's about it. So I know I crashed a lot of things here, but super overtime. So I don't know if you have any questions. I don't know if you have any time for it, but maybe 1 or 2 questions we can take, if audience is okay with it. I know we are already late on this.
Hi, my name is Jose. I'm CTO of Stamplus, company from Kstart. I have a question. You mentioned at some point engineering and product teams. So at what point do you think, at what point of the company would it be a good idea to separate engineering and product teams and get VPs for them, or if it's something that we'll do early or maybe later on?
Yeah.
What are your insights on that?
So based on, so it just depends. So for first 2.5 years at BigBasket, when we had already pretty large business, I had no engineering manager, no product manager. I was the only manager in the team, right? But my bandwidth was getting way too stretched, and I had the product background, so I could do those roles. But if you are not able to do a product role, and if you think you're not very good at it, you're a good techie, get a product manager early on. I think that will be a good hire, right? Because some of the things, the data orientation, measure everything, look at the impact. And so that does take a lot of time, right? You have to look at things, how the product is performing, as opposed to just writing requirements. Because you don't want to get into a habit of just building and keep building new things and just accumulating all these product features, and you don't know, are they working, not working, what would happen, right? So I would say, maybe in the first 6 to 12 months, get your first product manager. Yeah.
Yeah. So how important is it to hire, experienced individuals, say, instead of hiring a new candidate, for example, a fresher who's quite good, quite talented, versus hiring a experienced person who has about 2 to 5 years of experience? That's for a startup.
Yeah, so as I said, one anchor with 3 engineers is a great thing, right? So if you have that model, because if you don't want to have 8 freshers and 1 anchor, because then you have too many freshers or too many junior guys, they're sucking up bandwidth with the seniors a lot, and they just spending time. So I think 1:3 would be a good number.
And just a follow-up question on that is, how would you, again, experience is something, it depends from person to person. So what would ideally be a good experience? How many years of experience?
So when I say 1:3, so at least I would say 6+ years experience is that one, and then you could have somebody with freshers to about 4 or 5 years experience, 3 engineers, right? And now, and the 6 years is just a rule of thumb. Sometimes you can get a superstar with 1 year experience. Okay, then that can put other 20 years at shame, right? So use judgment there. It needs to essentially seniority is the output, not the number of years of experience. You know what I'm saying? So Zuckerberg was 17 when he created Facebook. So.
Pramod, I had a question.
Yeah.
So you talked about picking up open source components and using it, right? So we were talking about the back end, but that also happens a lot on the front end nowadays, right?
Yeah.
Where we pick up libraries.
Yeah.
There was this entire fiasco with React where people just found out that it had a BSD plus a patent license and Facebook could actually claim the user interfaces, right? Until after 3 months, they actually changed the licensing back.
Yeah.
So when we look at choosing the open source components that we use for building our products, what kind of licensing do you think is preferable? Should it be an MIT or an Apache? Or what do you think is more?
I think if Apache is the most lenient license to use, right? But if you are using a completely brand new product which has industry, adoption, just look at the license first, right? Because sometimes we have rejected the product. Somebody or developer would say, I want to use this. And we looked at the license and says, no, we don't want to use this, right? So just do spend time on that, okay? MIT, I think also is fairly okay, right? Apache is no problem with that, right? A lot of the GNU licenses earlier used to have the LGPL and all that stuff. I think most of those things aren't there now. Yeah, we shouldn't use that. You shouldn't use those things because then you are liable to, to put all that thing as part of the license, right? So just be careful on that because there may be other equivalent which doesn't have that licensing requirement.
Yeah, I think we can take more questions during tea, Pramod. Pramod will be available.
Okay, so maybe one more question and then we'll have more.
I just wanted to understand how important is the role of QA and can it be done away with?
So I didn't talk about automation much because there's so many things to cover. But get into a habit of automating as much as you can, as early as you can, and get into a CI/CD kind of mode, right? Easier said than done, but if you can get that, and then the reason I said QA should be also computer scientist is because they should be more programmers. They're just programming different things. That's my thought on QA, right? Even though they may be doing QA, but their main job should be to write automation, right? And then you could get them out completely if you want. And Facebook doesn't have any QA engineers today. One of the largest companies in the world.
Does it have to be a separate person who does the QA?
No, it can be the same developer, right? So I mean, I didn't talk too much about the quality, but you have to get the developer. That's why I said robustness first, right? You have to make it work, and that's really a developer's responsibility to make it work, right? Not that I develop code and somebody tests it, that doesn't work. All right, so I'm available outside, so if you have more questions, we can take it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Pramod. What I'll do is just take less than 5 minutes to recall the key points from today, and then we close. So the first session that Vani moderated was around fundraising. And so the key questions that the panel addressed was, so in terms of making a pitch to VCs, the role of the banker versus the founder, and the guidelines, the advice was very clear. It's the founder who is the prime mover. The banker is the contributor, not the prime mover. Founder versus co-founders, that probably better to have in terms of when making the pitch, for the founder to take the to play the primary role. If multiple co-founders take turns, that it should actually come across as cohesive, so that it is clear as to what is going on. Any disagreement should be handled off stage. Which VC partner? Obviously, if you get the top VC partner of the firm, that's great. But that's often not going to be the case. It is very important that, of course, in terms of which to look into that particular VC partner who is going to sit on your board. What is their experience background? Do they know your particular domain? Do they have the networks that they can bring to value add for your venture? So things like that. Obviously, the same question should be asked about which VC firm you should be talking to. How much money do you raise? So there was disagreement on the panel. Priyanka, I think, was saying take as much money as you can. The others were kind of not exactly saying the same. thing. My own take is that if you take, and just from having served on boards of tech ventures, is that if you, let's say, take as much money as you can early on, you got to remember there is a cost, because money taken early on is more expensive than money taken later on. So you need to factor that in. What's the cost of money, not just how much money you are taking. How much in advance should you get there, as I think Ravi Shankar, he was talking about that, you got to plan 12 months in advance. So let's say, you want to raise 1 billion today and 3 millions in the next round, that even as you're working on the 1 million, you want to start planning in advance in terms of when do you begin discussions, scoping out, et cetera, for the next one. So it could take the whole process, 12 months or more. One question that it didn't come up in the panel discussion that from my own experience is hugely important in terms of raising money. At least in the Silicon Valley context, it's said very often, is that money is not just money. It comes with an adjective. It can be, of course, it can be just money, so then just is the adjective, or it can be smart money or dumb money. And smart money, of course, is where the people who bring money, they bring value add in terms of their experience, in terms of their network. Dumb money is where you don't have the experience or the network, and the person essentially, because he or she is an investor, asks a lot of questions and wastes your time and pushes you to go in the wrong direction. And so, dumb money can be the case of death. And there are examples in, certainly in the Bay Area, but also elsewhere, where ventures have taken money because it was smart money, even though they didn't need the money. But they couldn't get the smart without the money. So therefore, they went to the VCs, and of course, in that case, it's top-tier VCs because they don't need the money, but they do need the VCs to help them, to work for them. Then, the strategy session, and there, the key point was that strategy requires making choices. If you can't make choices, you're not being strategic at all. You have to make choices about what game to play, how to play the game. And of course, if you can discover, occupy a blue ocean, and it's a large market, that's really great. But every good news has a potential bad news with it, which is that you want to discover, occupy a large blue ocean space. But it's rarely the case that you have the monopoly on wisdom and insight, which means that that large opportunity will be obvious to lots of other competitors and VCs. So therefore, blue oceans have a tendency to become red oceans. And you need to therefore be smart at how do you discover, occupy blue oceans, but then also how do you fight and win red oceans, like the difference between Steve Jobs 1.0 versus 2.0. Red oceans, think both on stage and backstage. In terms of competitive advantage, there are two parts to it. Competitive advantage is perceived by the customer, and second, advantage in terms of your capabilities. If you don't have backstage advantages, you can't sustain on-stage advantages. So think in both of those terms. Then in terms of growth, obviously, especially for startups, you want to scale at speed without stumbling. And if you want to scale at speed, you have no choice but to actually think in terms of sequencing, okay? And sequencing means some things you give high priority to push those growth avenues harder today. Some other things that you will pursue at some point, but that's not today. That may be left for tomorrow, maybe left for day after. And you see smart tech companies doing that, like Jeff Bezos, Amazon, back in 1994, making those choices. But you see also large companies doing that. Like Walmart example, when they started going global, they looked at Latin America first. In Latin America, 3 biggest economies out of about 20-odd countries are Mexico, Brazil, Argentina. They went after those 3, ignored the rest for 15 years because rest was mopping up operation. And they said, if we capture these 3, rest we can go after 15 years, we can wait, rather than get caught up in the complexity. Of course, we had what I hope was fascinating and value-adding discussions, analysis around Stan Plus and edge networks. Then we had the session with Rajan, and of course, which was a complement to the session with Nandan yesterday. And Rajan's message was really the 100 million is more or less like the tech crunch, but it's the next 300 million, the next 400 million, the next billion. And in the India of today and tomorrow, the big opportunity is really that next 300 million and eventually the next 600 million and beyond. And what he said was that reaching customer acquisition is increasingly not an issue. Because, and of course, especially if you focus on tailoring, for instance, on the language front to the different language zones of India, different languages in India, customer acquisition is becoming easier and easier. The key problem, especially for companies, startups, unlike, say, Google, is to be thinking about monetization. And on monetization, he said that not a whole lot you're going to be able to discover or figure out the right approach on pricing through analysis. That experimentation will generally be the big thing that guides you. And then, of course, we had the session just now with Pramod, so I'm not going to try and summarize that, because we just had it, and in any case, I don't have the technical savvy to summarize that properly. So with that, I hope that the day was useful to you. It was value-adding to you. Because again, as the whole idea behind Kstart Institute, behind all successful accelerators, incubators, is that a huge chunk of the value-adding that happens is through learning opportunities like this, which are, let's say, formally created. Of course, learning opportunities that happen as you interact with other startups, and of course, as you interact, for instance, with the senior people at Kstart, and in this case, also with Kalaari. So with that, great to have spent, for me, to have spent time with all of you. My slides, either they have already been distributed. If not, I will request that they be distributed to all of you. And then, and the slides have my email address, my contact information. So in case you need to, any of you need to reach out to me, most welcome. Thank you.